1918 Malbone Street Wreck. On the evening of November 1st, 1918, rush hour commuters in Brooklyn boarded what they thought would be an ordinary ride home. Instead, the train tore into history as the deadliest accident ever to strike the New York City subway system. Packed with about 650 passengers, the wooden-bodied cars barreled into a tight S-curve in the tunnel under Malbone Street at 30 to 40 miles per hour, 5 times the posted limit of 6 miles per hour. The result was carnage. Between 93 and 102 people lost their lives, and around 250 were injured. Survivors described the wreckage as a nightmarish jungle of splintered wood, shattered glass, and twisted steel. The man at the controls, 25-year-old Antonio Luciano, wasn't even a certified motorman. He had received less than 3 hours of training compared to the standard 90 hours and had never run passenger service before. Luciano had been pressed into duty that morning because of a strike by the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. To make matters worse, he was grieving the death of his infant daughter from the Spanish flu just days earlier. When confronted by a survivor after the crash, his only explanation was chillingly simple: "I lost control of the damn thing." Investigators pointed to a perfect storm of errors: Luciano's inexperience, unsafe train coupling, and a dangerously designed tunnel. In court, BRT officials faced manslaughter charges but were acquitted. Still, the consequences were devastating. The company was bankrupted under $75 million in claims and reorganized in 1923. Victims' families received settlements, with the largest payout being $40,000, roughly $740,000 today. The wreck forced long overdue reforms, phasing out wooden cars, installing better safety devices, and implementing stricter operator training. Yet for decades, trains still rattled through that same tunnel where nearly 100 lives were cut short. Today, a bronze plaque at Prospect Park Station ensures the Malbone Street Wreck is never forgotten, a tragedy that reshaped subway safety in America. 1995 Williamsburg Bridge subway collision. In the early hours of June 5, 1995, New Yorkers woke to a grim reminder of how fragile the subway system could be. At 6:18 a.m., a J train thundered across the Williamsburg Bridge toward Manhattan, ignoring multiple red and yellow signals, before slamming into the back of a stationary M train. The impact killed 46-year-old motorman Leighton Gibson, a veteran with 14 years of service, and injured 54 passengers, one of them critically. Both trains together carried about 200 people that morning, many of them heading to work. The investigation revealed a disturbing picture. Gibson, nearing the end of an 8-hour overnight shift, was severely fatigued. His blood tested negative for drugs and alcohol, leaving exhaustion as the most likely culprit. Witnesses recalled the J train had already braked erratically earlier, nearly colliding at a junction 4 stations before the crash. Yet the system designed to protect against such errors had failed spectacularly. Some signals dated back to 1918, and the emergency braking rods that should have stopped the J train didn't align properly that day. The NTSB concluded that a red signal was overrun, but because of equipment failure, no automatic brake was triggered. The aftermath forced the MTA to rethink its operations. Maximum speeds on straight tracks were cut from 55 miles per hour to 40 miles per hour, and new grade time signals were installed to slow trains until conditions were safe. While these measures increased delays and fueled the 2017 to 2018 transit crisis, they were born from tragedy. The front car of the J train and the rear car of the M train were completely destroyed, their undamaged counterparts paired and preserved in Coney Island Yard as somber relics. This was not an isolated event, but the 4th major subway crash in less than 4 years, a stark warning about aging infrastructure and the human cost of neglect. 1991 Union Square derailment. In the early minutes of August 28, 1991, chaos erupted beneath Union Square. A southbound 4 Lexington Avenue express train, packed with 216 passengers, roared toward the station at nearly 50 miles per hour, 5 times the safe speed limit for a construction zone requiring just 10 miles per hour. The result was catastrophic. 5 passengers lost their lives, and 161 were injured, including 16 seriously, making it the deadliest New York subway disaster since the 1928 Times Square derailment. At the controls was 38-year-old Robert E. Ray, a motorman who never should have been on duty. He showed up late, with bloodshot eyes, wearing tennis shoes, yet was waved through. His reckless driving began immediately, overshooting stations and ignoring warnings from both his conductor and an off-duty colleague riding home. By the time the train reached the critical crossover at Union Square, disaster was inevitable. Several cars crumpled like paper. Car 1440 was split in half after slamming a steel pillar, while others folded around support beams. One rescuer described the wreck so mangled that it was impossible to tell where one car ended and another began. Ray later admitted he had been drinking heavily the day before, depressed over personal troubles, and claimed he blacked out before the crash. His blood alcohol level tested at 0.21, more than double New York's legal limit of 0.10 at the time. Arrested hours later, he was eventually convicted of 5 counts of second-degree manslaughter, sentenced to 5 to 15 years, and released in 2002. The tragedy forced the MTA into action, launching random drug and alcohol testing for subway operators and bus drivers. The agency estimated payouts to victims between $5 million and $10 million. Beyond the immediate loss, the accident spurred safety upgrades, from redesigned crossovers to speed indicating systems, changes that reshaped subway operations for decades. 1977 Chicago Loop derailment. On February 4, 1977, the evening rush hour in Chicago turned into a nightmare on the elevated tracks of the loop. At 5:25 p.m., a Lake Dan Ryan train failed to stop and slammed into the back of a waiting Ravenswood train near Wabash Avenue and Lake Street. The initial impact was described by passengers as a mere quiet thump, but what followed was sheer devastation. The operator, Stephen A. Martin, inexplicably kept applying power, forcing cars to jackknife. Within seconds, the first 3 cars were shoved upward and toppled from the elevated structure. 2 plunged directly onto the street below, killing 11 people and injuring more than 180. The tragedy unfolded partly because of chaos in the loop's operations that day. A switching problem earlier had rerouted the Evanston Express onto tracks usually reserved for other lines, creating a traffic jam in the heart of downtown. The Ravenswood was already stopped waiting its turn, but Martin ignored both track and cab signals. Investigators later uncovered his troubling record: reading while driving, chatting with passengers, and even involvement in a prior derailment. Tests revealed traces of THC, though it could not be proven whether he was impaired at the time. The wreck left cars hanging from the structure, like twisted metal toys. Units 2,289 to 2,290 and 2,043 to 2,044 were beyond repair and scrapped, while others were salvaged and returned to service. Public outrage was immediate. Within months, Martin was fired, and the Chicago Transit Authority banned operators from proceeding past a red signal without explicit clearance from control. Structural reinforcements were added to prevent cars from falling off the elevated tracks again. This disaster, killing 11 in a single evening commute, remains one of the deadliest in CTA history. It exposed how a single operator's recklessness, combined with outdated systems, could turn Chicago's signature loop into the scene of one of the city's darkest transit tragedies. 2009 Washington Metro collision. Rush hour in Washington, D.C. turned into chaos on June 22, 2009, when 2 Red Line trains collided between Tacoma and Fort Totten. At 5:02 p.m., Train 112 slammed into the rear of Train 214 at nearly 49 miles per hour, leaving behind a scene of twisted steel and smoke. The disaster killed 9 people, including the operator Janice McMillan, and left about 80 others injured, making it the deadliest crash in Metro's history. Survivors said it felt like hitting a concrete wall. The tragedy was traced back to a hidden failure in the system. Just days before, a faulty track circuit had been replaced, but engineers overlooked a dangerous flaw: parasitic oscillations that made an entire stretch of track essentially invisible. That meant the stop train ahead didn't register, and the automatic train control system told the following train to barrel forward at 55 miles per hour. By the time the operator saw the train in her path and pulled the emergency brake, it was too late. The aftermath revealed another disturbing truth. The 1000 series railcars, the oldest in the system, were structurally weak, prone to telescoping and collisions, and had already been flagged years earlier as unsafe. Instead of immediate retirement, they remained in service until 2017, long after the Fort Totten crash proved their deadly vulnerability. Rescue teams worked through the night with cranes, ladders, and heavy equipment, while soldiers and bystanders stepped in to help the injured. Among the dead was Major General David F. Worley Jr., who had scrambled jets over Washington on September 11, 2001. 6 years later, the city opened the Legacy Memorial Park, featuring 9 sculptures for each life lost. Yet, the haunting fact remains. Warnings had been sounded years before, but the flaws were allowed to linger, until tragedy forced change at the cost of 9 lives. 2024 New York City train collision. On the afternoon of January 4, 2024, chaos erupted beneath Manhattan's Upper West Side. Just north of 96th Street Station, a northbound 1 train carrying nearly 300 passengers slammed into a disabled train and derailed, sending 25 people to the hospital with minor injuries. no one lost their life that day, but the scene underground was one of twisted steel, shattered glass, and frightened commuters scrambling to safety. The chain of events that led to the collision sounds like a script of errors. Hours earlier, an unruly passenger had repeatedly yanked the emergency brake on the disabled train, crippling its systems near 79th Street. Despite attempts by inspectors and staff, the brakes could not be reset, forcing the train to be taken out of service and awkwardly moved along the tracks. Operating from the middle of the train instead of the front, the supervisor lost crucial radio communication near 96th Street. That silence meant he never received the command to stop. Moments later, the Active 1 train, switching from the express to the local track, clipped the stalled cars. Within seconds, 5 cars between both trains jumped off the rails. The damage was severe. Car 2176, the lead of the disabled train, was crushed beyond repair and written off entirely, salvaged only for spare parts. Hundreds of passengers were evacuated into the dark tunnels before being brought safely to the surface. The fallout stretched far beyond the crash site. Service on the first, second, and third lines was crippled for 2 full days, with commuters forced into reroutes and delays until Governor Kathy Hochul announced full service restoration at 4:45 a.m. on January 7th. The NTSB launched an investigation, zeroing in on human error, mechanical failures, and the absence of federally required event recorders. It was a terrifying reminder that even in a city where millions depend on the subway daily, a single misstep can send hundreds into chaos. 2014 New York City subway derailment. On the morning of May 2, 2014, New Yorkers commuting through Queens were thrust into chaos when an Express F train derailed near 65th Street and Broadway in Woodside. The accident struck just before 10:30 a.m., jolting riders in a packed tunnel only 1,200 feet south of the 65th Street station. Firefighters and EMS rushed underground, guiding shaken passengers up emergency ladders and staircases that led through grates to the street above. In the immediate aftermath, officials confirmed that there were no fatalities. However, 4 passengers suffered serious injuries, and many more were treated for shock and minor harm. Riders could be seen resting on stretchers and in wheelchairs after the exhausting climb to safety. By 12:15 p.m., every passenger had been evacuated, but the scars of panic lingered long after the tunnel was cleared. The derailment crippled the transit network. F-train service was halted in both directions between Jamaica 179th Street and 21st Street Queensbridge, while ripple effects disrupted the E, M, and R lines as well. Power was cut to surrounding tracks, leaving 3 nearby trains frozen in place. MTA Commissioner Thomas Prendergast stood at the scene coordinating the emergency response, as thousands of commuters scrambled to reroute their day. For perspective, New York's subway is a giant lifeline, carrying an average of 5.5 million weekday riders. Derailments this severe are rare, yet the incident in Queens evoked haunting memories of the 1991 Union Square disaster, where a drunk motorman sent a southbound number. 4 train careening off the rails, killing 5 people and injuring over 200. That tragedy ended with a conviction and a 15-year prison sentence. The 2014 derailment did not claim lives, but it underscored how even a single slip on the tracks can paralyze the system and shake the confidence of millions who depend on it daily. 1996 Shady Grove Metro Rail collision. Late on the night of January 6, 1996, a tragedy unfolded on Washington, D.C.'s Metro Rail Red Line. Train T111, a 4-car subway set, approached the Shady Grove station in Gaithersburg, Maryland. But instead of stopping at the platform, it slid past, running 470 feet beyond the station into the rail yard. There, it slammed into a standing 6-car Gap train that was waiting for service. The impact crushed the lead car of T111, killing its 48-year-old operator, while the train's only 2 passengers survived without injuries. The crash was violent. The front car of T111 telescoped as much as 21 feet into the stationary train, completely destroying the operator's cab. Damage estimates range between $2.1 million and $2.6 million. Investigators later found that the operator had attempted emergency braking, but the conditions and the system's limitations made stopping impossible. That night, a winter storm warning was in effect. Snow and icy tracks had already caused trains to overrun platforms. Controllers in the Operations Control Center noticed the problems, but refused to allow operators to switch from automatic to manual control, even though crews on the ground requested it. Instead, they reduced performance levels through the computer system, measures that proved insufficient when train T111 accelerated to 75 miles per hour on the final stretch. It entered Shady Grove still traveling over 50 miles per hour, far too fast to stop safely. The National Transportation Safety Board later concluded that WMATA management failed to address flaws in the automatic train control system and ignored warnings about braking problems in bad weather. They also faulted the decision to allow gap trains to be parked directly in the path of incoming traffic. What should have been an ordinary stop at the last station of the night instead exposed deep cracks in oversight and decision-making, at the cost of a life and millions of dollars in destruction. 2010 Red Line train derailment. On the morning of February 12, 2010, chaos erupted beneath Washington, D.C. when Metrorail Red Line train 156 derailed just outside Farragut North Station. The six-car train, carrying 345 passengers, slipped into a pocket track instead of staying on the main line. The operator, already struggling with confusing communications from the Operations Control Center, pushed forward at only 7 miles per hour past a red signal, straight over an active derail. The lead car's wheels jumped the rails, dragging forward 27.9 feet before grinding to a halt. The derailment left 3 passengers injured. 2 were treated on-site and released, while 1 was briefly hospitalized. The damage, however, carried a much heavier cost. Repairs to the derailed car totaled about $174,000, though the tracks and signals were spared major destruction. Behind the accident was a troubling mix of human error and oversight. The operator had only recently returned to service after a 9-year injury absence, completing refresher training just weeks earlier. On the day of the crash, her train was assigned the wrong identification number and no proper destination code, leading to confusion in routing. When she heard garbled radio messages and assumed permission had been granted to move forward, the mistake set the derailment in motion. The investigation revealed deeper cracks. WMATA management failed to supervise adequately, leaving incomplete train configurations unchecked. Post-accident reviews highlighted that the operator ignored rules about stopping at red signals and moving only with clear radio authorization. She was charged with multiple violations, including unsafe operation and failure to properly confirm radio instructions. Though no lives were lost, the event became another stark reminder of how small lapses, garbled communications, incomplete codes, and overlooked supervision can spiral into incidents that shake rider confidence and leave behind both human scars and financial costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.